Now, welcome to another edition of Battle of the Heroes and Villains, where this time we'll be taking a look at the results of the poll that asked you to grade Asajj Ventress. I'll then be comparing those results against the results of all the other characters we've done thus far, before then reading and responding to some of your comments. And speaking of other characters, you can of course already head down to the comments below to nominate or vote for which one we should do next. Just respond to my pinned comment down there with a character's name or vote with a thumbs up if the one you want to see is already there. Last week I think was our closest vote yet, with only a few votes separating Revan and Ventress. So in other words, every vote can count in the end, and as always, any and all characters across Star Wars are eligible. Okay, so let's now get to the results for Ventress, and we'll see that 15% of voters thought she was an A tier character, 60% gave her a B, 21% thought she was a C, and then 2% gave her a D, and a final 2% gave her an F. And so when we do all the math here and consider A a score of 5 and F a score of 1, Asajj Ventress ends up with a score of 3.84, which puts her into 9th place overall, right between her fellow Clone Wars or prequel era villains, Count Dooku and General Grievous. And before getting to the comments, I'll just quickly say that I'm not overly surprised by these results. I thought she'd maybe finish a little below Grievous, but she managed to beat him by 0.05 of a point. And it's kind of interesting to see how neatly those prequel era villains, outside of Palpatine of course, all sort of group up together, and that people seemingly feel they're all maybe an upper B level character. Oh, and just to clear up a question I see get asked quite a bit, the simple reason why there is no S tier in the voting, even though I do think some characters deserve something more than just an A, is because I only get to list 5 options on the polls. Still, I think the final calculated score gives us a great indicator of how people overall feel about these characters, and which would likely be S tier material if the choice was there. Alright, and let's now move on to your comments, starting as we always do with the top rated comment, which this time came to us from Ewok Pilot, who said, "Ventress is a very interesting character. When we're introduced to her in the movie and even in the 2003 series, she is a very one-dimensional, quote-unquote bad guy character who just seems to exist for the sake of having another villain to throw at our heroes in the Clone Wars. But she really gets her time to shine in Season 3 and onwards. She is given more depth when she's betrayed by her Master Dooku, and we see her backstory from being a slave, to being a Jedi, to an assassin, to a witch, and finally a bounty hunter. Her story is truly one of tragedy, as every time she feels she's found her place, she loses everything. And you can see why she's become such a hateful and remorseless person. Overall, I've given Ventress a B. And there were a lot of comments this week that said how in the Clone Wars series, she started out as sort of the generic bad guy, which I do agree with, and that only later on in the show she becomes something far more interesting. And though probably not intentional or intended by the creators, I kind of like that approach with her. I like that for the first few seasons, you get it stuck in your head that she's just bad for the sake of being bad, that there's nothing interesting about her or her story, that she's just in a sense a throwaway character for our heroes to tangle with from time to time. But that's when she gets thrown away by Dooku in the story. As this comment from Grant Holland essentially says, she's a pretty stagnant character at first, but then becomes something compelling after Dooku, because that's when we start to learn that there is a character here, a story here, and that part of her story is she doesn't know what her place is, where she belongs, and that she's sort of been used and let herself be used just for the sake of having some sort of purpose. Again, I don't think that was their intent. I think they just eventually got around to doing something with her, but I feel it worked well to make her seem like this generic villain who is evil because they're just evil, that she was doing what she did just for the sake of doing it, because that's kind of who she was at that point. Okay, let's now move on to this comment from Revan03, who said, "One of the more unique characters in the Clone Wars. She started out as a one-dimensional bad guy for our heroes to frequently run into, but once Dooku betrayed her, Ventress became a true highlight of the show. Her transformation from a Sith apprentice into a bounty hunter was well done and helped flesh out her character's personality. If the Dark Disciple storyline was made into a Clone Wars arc, then her character may be moved into the A range. Overall, she is a B-level character." Then we had this comment from Stannis MR, who said, "I'd give her a B only for the fact we didn't get to see the conclusion of her story. Dark Disciple put to screen. Then this one from 2amigo M22 Locust, who said, she has the most underrated character arc in all of Star Wars. If Dark Disciple was animated, she'd have an A right now. And then this one from Poe Dameron, who said, after Dark Disciple A, but just from what we've seen in the Clone Wars, B. And finally in this little block of comments, this one from Mando Pool, who said, probably would have given her an A if Dark Disciple novel ended up being the episodes that it was supposed to be. Many will not know how her story ends, simply because it was cut out of a book and thrown out for the Ahsoka Martez arc, which should have been Nick's. Okay, and before I get into this, I almost feel like saying spoiler warning, because it was clear from the comments this week where some people were saying where they'd like to see her show up next, that there are quite a few people out there who don't know that there was a book called Dark Disciple that, well, again, spoiler warning here, very much ends her story, that she of course dies in it, saving Quinlan Vos, who had briefly fallen to the dark side after the Jedi Council had sent him to basically assassinate Dooku. Which, no, is obviously not very Jedi-like, and they don't all agree on this course of action, which is all an interesting topic for another time perhaps. But anyway, during this book, and it's a good book worth reading if you haven't checked it out before, anyway, during this book, Quinlan Vos is turned to the dark side by Dooku after being sent to assassinate him, and Asajj, via the power of love you could say, brings him back to the light and ultimately gives her life to save him in the end. And this was actually going to be an epic 8-part Clone Wars story arc, though if I'm remembering right, it was actually going to be broken up into 2 4-parters. I could be wrong about that. Anyway, this was going to be a major story in the Clone Wars, but got turned into a book instead shortly after the show was cancelled. And though again, the book was good, if we had gotten this epic story arc and saw this tragic death and final transformation of this character on screen, I do think, as the comments before suggested, her score would have been much higher. Alright, now let's move on to this comment from Maximi, who said, in a way, she's like the inverse of Ahsoka. Both start out as somewhat uninteresting characters, but eventually grow to be some of the most compelling ones. Solid B. Then this one from Harris Syed, who said, I'd say Asajj Ventress is one of the best Star Wars characters out there. She's like a female alien version of Anakin Skywalker / Darth Vader. Born a slave, was a former Jedi Knight, saw a loved one die, became a Sith, and would die a heroic sacrifice. As George Lucas put it, it's like poetry. It rhymes. We also had this one from Adam X78, who said, I'd give her a B. She is honestly a good counter to Ahsoka, and an all-around good character. Just wouldn't put her up with an A personally. Then also this comment from the new one 117, who said, she's the dark side equivalent to Ahsoka. She had a tragic backstory and was used, then eventually being redeemed and had a heartbreaking send-off. A. And yeah, I certainly think you can make the case here that she is sort of a mirror of Ahsoka and or Anakin even. Going along with what I said before, Asajj did sort of start out as this generic villain who did bad for the sake of doing bad, not unlike how Ahsoka just sort of starts out being good for the sake of being good. But both end up kind of being used by their respective superiors before being tossed aside, in a sense, when they're no longer needed. And then they have to search for a new reason or their own reasons to go on. That then kind of brings us to this comment from R4MB052, who said, honestly, I didn't like her much when she was following Dooku's orders, but I started to like her more when she worked on her own as a bounty hunter. For example, when she teamed up with Ahsoka, when she worked with Boba Fett, or when she teamed up with Obi-Wan. B. We also had this one from Malicho, who said, even though she wasn't the best villain, I did look forward to her playful taunting her dear Obi-Wan and the chemistry between her and the heroes. She proved time and again that she shouldn't be taken lightly. She held her own and proved to be cunning, skilled, and vengeful in an intelligent and tactful way. She was smart enough to make moves that would benefit her and her goals, and allying herself with Ahsoka, and during that alliance keeping her word. I give her a B. Great points, and I think it's kind of funny how one of the oddest yet best relationships, I guess you could call it, in the entire show was Asajj and Obi-Wan. There was real chemistry between those two. One of my favorite lightsaber battles in the whole show was Obi-Wan and Ventress versus Savage and Maul, not just because it was a great fight visually and even emotionally, but there was some top-tier wit and banter going on between Obi-Wan and Ventress in it. I like to believe that in some alternate reality, those two ended up together. Okay, let's now move on to this comment from Robert Ortez Wilson, who said, "She's one of the few characters from the original EU/Legends that was made very different in canon, but was still surprisingly good. In the EU, she has a very well-written backstory, is involved in a lot of great stories, and is a very tragic character for which the audience can feel a great deal of sympathy and sadness, for while also grappling with what she's done, like what Obi-Wan and a few others see. In canon, or just the Clone Wars and her novel, she starts out seemingly a bit one-noted and finally starts to get interesting when she gets betrayed by Dooku under Sidious's orders. Then we get to see flashbacks of her backstory, which is mostly the same as the one taken from the EU, with just a few notable changes. She tries to take revenge, loses more people she knows, and then just tries to survive while getting aligned with and fighting against all sorts of different factions and individuals. Later on, she gets into a relationship only to have need for revenge, and tragedy strikes one last time. Basically, what I'm summing up here is that both are different characters with the same name, both are well written, and both are tragic characters. I think personally, I might lean towards her EU version a little more, but I see both as justifiably great. Very much agreed. I think Asajj is one of those characters that's been handled very well pretty much everywhere, and isn't better or worse in the EU when compared to the official canon. The greatest loss, however, and this was yet another thing a lot of people talked about in the comments, was losing her duel with Anakin in the original 2003 Clone Wars series. If you've never seen it, do yourself a favor and check it out. You can probably find it here on YouTube. It's epic and well done, and something I'll probably try to talk about at length another time. But for now, let's get to just one final comment here, and it comes to us from C. Bowser, who said, "She is a good character, but I don't think she fits in A with characters like Anakin/Vader, Obi-Wan, Luke, etc." And I think you're right. I think Asajj is a fantastic character all around, but she's not one of the truly greats in all of Star Wars. She's not a Darth Vader level character, though few in all of fiction really are. Instead, she's a very, very solid B level character, or maybe an A if we had that S tier. Okay, and before wrapping this up, let me quickly mention that at long last, or after talking about it a bit several months ago, I did start up a second channel, one that will be a bit more fun and lighthearted, that will focus more on games, collecting, and similar topics. I'll also be doing things like meme reviews there, so that maybe people can see a somewhat different side of me. So if you're interested in that, there will be a link to the Mandalorian meme review I did the other day in the pinned comment below. Well, that is all I've got for you this time. Now it's your turn to tell me what you think of Asajj Ventress, or what I or anyone else had to say about her in this video. Either that, or head down to the comments and vote or nominate for what character we should do next, or go check out my second channel. One way or another, let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.